We will call the meeting to order 7 o'clock, to September 22nd, 2021. Before we begin, I have a couple administrative things I wanted to go over. First of all, as I believe all of us know, Jeff Larson had to resign from the commission because of business issues that he had to take care of, personal issues. And I would like to make a motion thanking Jeff Larson for his service on the Planning and Zoning Commission and wishing him well in his future endeavors. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Moving on. The agenda that I put together every month, I don't know how many of you remember a couple years ago, our agendas were basically call the meeting to order, approve the agenda, approve the minutes, discussion, and adjournment, which I didn't think was very helpful to either the commissioners or the public. So I've tried to be more complete in the agenda with listing things that we will go over so the public and other commissioners have an idea what the topics will be. I just would like to remind the commissioners that I start working on these almost immediately after a meeting, and we get the agenda to Sharon about 2 weeks before our meeting so that she can put it together and publish it on the town's website. So if you have items for the agenda, I'd appreciate it if you could get them in at least 2 weeks prior to our meeting so that we can add them and make them public. If you have other items that come up after that, we can always amend the agenda at the beginning of our meeting, which you will have the opportunity to do. But just so you know, that's the process that I've been following. It may seem like 2 weeks ahead of time is pretty early, but Sharon has to get it out and we have to process it and post it. So it takes a little time. Let's see, since our last meeting, we posted the comprehensive plan, the draft comprehensive plan for public review. And we set a date for a public hearing. That public hearing will be on November 9th. Let's see, as part of our agenda, I wanted to discuss future dates in November and December, since they are very close to the holidays, or they don't interrupt the holidays, but they're almost on top of them. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. For those of you that have been listening to the town council meetings at their work session earlier this month, they discussed both the moratorium and the 35-foot height limit amendment that we had sent to them. With regards to the moratorium, they passed that on to the town council meeting where they take action, and they took action to extend the moratorium by 3 months to provide adequate time for the comprehensive plan. With regards to the 35-foot height limit, there was a lot of discussion during the working session. There was, it's hard to characterize where, what that, because nothing was agreed. There was no motion made, and it was not included on the town council's meeting last week. So they have not addressed that issue. The one thing that stuck out to me from the from the work session, and it's not the only point that was made, but they were inclined to wait until they see the entire comprehensive plan, till they get it to review, to consider changes rather than piecemeal changes to the ordinances based on the comprehensive plan. That's my interpretation of where they're at. There may be others, but that's where it sits. Town council has it. They have not acted on the 35-foot height limit. Finally, on my list of things, at the very end of your packet, there's the report from the Kellum's Revitalization Committee, a report dated June 29th. I hope everyone's had a chance to look at that, review it. It's 3 pages long. I didn't see anything in that contradicts what we have discussed and proposed in the comprehensive plan. Does anyone else see it differently? Okay, I know that was, go ahead.
I don't see that anything in their report contradicts anything that we want to do, but I did notice that in our draft comprehensive plan, we mentioned cottages or constructing cottages in that area. And I think that line within our comprehensive plan isn't reflected in the Kellum's committee. So when the time comes, we should probably consider striking that portion of what we wrote.
All right, okay, so I know we had mentioned several times the Kellum's committee report and making sure that our plan and the Kellum's committee report was consistent. So I would like to make a motion stating that nothing in the comprehensive plan is intended to conflict with the Kellum's Revitalization Committee report dated June 29th. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Is there any discussion?
Can you repeat the motion, please, Chairman Brown?
Yes, motion would be that nothing in the draft comprehensive plan that we have proposed is intended to conflict with the Kellum's Revitalization Committee report of June 29th, 2021.
I'm rather confused by that motion. So in other words, we are making a motion that our comprehensive plan is not conflicting with their plan. Is that what you're saying?
We had discussed in a number of our meetings to make sure that we would revisit their report when we got it and to see whether it conflicted with the comprehensive plan. I'm just trying to tie that up because
Okay.
it's discussed a number of times.
Okay, so you're just wanting to state that they're not conflicting. The reports are not conflicting with our comprehensive plan. Okay, that's, I was just trying to clarify that.
So Chair, I think a more, I guess, appropriate motion to make would be that we have received the Kellum's Park Revitalization Committee meeting report, and we will address it as a comment, and we will reconcile our plan with these meeting minutes. Because if it's not in the comprehensive plan, the comprehensive plan isn't going to reference back to these minutes. So to actually make that true, we would need to change our comprehensive plan. And we're allowed to do that based on comments, so.
All right, so you'd like, so you're saying we should amend the motion to kick it down the road to the public hearing.
I mean, I don't know if we're kicking it down the road. I just want to make sure that what they have in their meeting minutes get into our plan. See what I'm saying?
Well, we've had their report. We didn't include it in the draft plan till now, but that we did put into our minutes that we would go back and make sure that the two did not conflict. So there
Right.
is no conflict between the two as I see it. Do you see it differently?
I do see it differently because in our draft, we mention that we're going to build cottages in that area.
Not on Killam's
And that-
Field.
That's what our plan says. If we
No,
go
no.
to our,
We've never discussed building onto Killam's Field.
I'm just going to go to our plan and read what we wrote. But we can move on and I'll find it.
All right, so I'll drop the motion. The commission doesn't want to address this, so if someone else wants to bring up the Killam's Field report in the future, then so be it. But I've made an effort to try and wrap that up, and I have an objection from one of our commissioners. So moving along, we have an agenda for tonight. Is there anything you want to add to the agenda or change in the agenda? Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
I make a motion to approve the agenda.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, unanimous. All right, we have the minutes from the August 25th Planning and Zoning meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minute.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, is there any discussion?
There's only one
None,
point.
all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
I think
Aye.
Kathleen had an objection. Did Kathleen have an objection?
I don't have an objection. The only clarification I wanted to make is that on point 5, the date for our November meeting is November 22nd. And I don't know, I don't have the revised minutes in front of me, but if that was amended to November 24th, which is actually the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, whereas November 22nd that appears in the agenda is Monday. So I just wanted to note that.
Okay, so that the minutes should reflect that our scheduled meeting is on Wednesday, the 24th, not on November 22nd.
Okay, now I see it. You've got the, now I've got the revised. I was looking at mine. Okay, that was my only comment.
All right, so we need to make sure that the minutes correctly reflect what is the schedule as of this moment, which is November 24th is the scheduled meeting, one of 2 scheduled meetings in November.
Yeah.
So, do we have all in favor of approving the minutes from August 25th?
Aye.
Aye.
I,
Okay, unanimous. All right. I don't know, are there any members of the public with us tonight? Seeing none, well, I guess Kathleen, you are Galaxy Tab S6, is that right?
I am, otherwise known as Kathleen.
All right, so we have no members of the public present to comment on the agenda, so we can move on to item 5. As you see there, our next scheduled meeting is the 4th Wednesday, October 27th. The meeting after that is November 9th, which is the public hearing on the comprehensive plan. The meeting after that, as scheduled right now, is November 24th and December 22nd. Seems to me that those are bad dates, immediately before Thanksgiving and immediately before Christmas. I would like to propose, since we have 2 meetings in November, that we skip the December meeting and take December off. So I will make a motion to eliminate the December 22nd meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion?
I have a question. Don't we need to possibly discuss the session in November 9th, if there are any concerns we may need to, since we're still counting down the clock on our moratorium, don't we possibly need to meet in December to try and resolve any issues that may have come up from our public hearing?
All right, so we can discuss November 9th after we decide on December 22nd, one thing at a time.
No, I'm talking about, don't we need a December meeting to discuss the November 9th meeting?
We'll have right now we have a November 24th meeting, which is what, about 2 weeks after the November 9th.
Oh,
meeting.
I see, we're not changing that one. Okay, I thought maybe you were changing that one.
Could we, I'm just concerned about our work schedule with the 3-month moratorium, 3-month extension. Is it possible that we could meet on the week before, on the 15th, December 15th?
Well, the dates we can meet are subject to the town
Approval.
availability to support it.
Mhm.
The only dates that I've gotten that they are able to support are November 23rd as an alternative to November 24th, Tuesday.
Nothing in December, like the first week of December?
I can only go with the dates that I was given.
Okay.
December 21st is an alternative to December 22nd, and November 23rd is the alternative to November 24th.
Well, the 21st is better than the 22nd in my mind, but
Yeah, I recommend that we hold one in December. If we want to cancel it, we can do that, but I think we should plan one because we may need to have that date, being that we have this moratorium and we want to get things done and we may need to get things done. I know it looks like we're finished, but I don't think we're finished. I don't think we're finished. So I think I would go with the November 23rd and the December 21st. That would be my opinion, but and then if we have to cancel December, at that point, we can cancel it a week ahead or whatever. We think we're all finished for the month. But I think we need to give ourselves a date in December.
Yeah, well, it would be nice for people to plan their holidays and when they travel and such too, you know. Okay, so the motion is on the floor. It's been seconded to cancel the December 22nd meeting. All in favor? All opposed? No
I
one's in favor,
oppose,
no one's
I
opposed.
oppose canceling the 22nd. I oppose canceling a December meeting. So I oppose the 22nd cancellation. I could move the 22nd to the 21st or move it somewhere, but.
Well, that wasn't an amendment. You know, one motion.
Okay, I oppose canceling the 22nd.
Okay,
yes.
I'll oppose canceling altogether.
So Commissioner Blackwell, you oppose canceling or in favor?
Yeah. Well, I oppose canceling without, let's amend the motion. Let's amend the motion to say we will cancel.
We had a discussion. We've got a motion. Let's vote on that motion.
Yeah,
and
let's
then-
vote on that motion, then we'll make a new motion.
Okay.
So are
Oppose
you,
cancel.
yeah, you oppose. Okay. So Commissioner Burrell.
I oppose.
Oh,
Okay, so everybody opposes, everybody's happy. Are there any other motions regarding dates?
I make a motion that we meet on 11/23/2021 and on 12/21/2021.
Okay,
Second.
all right, we have a motion, we have a second. Chris, can you make those dates?
Yes, I can make 11/23 and 12/21.
Okay. All right, so is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of changing it to the 23rd of November and the 21st of December?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, all in favor? Motion passes. Move on. Item number 6. Discussion of the zoning administrators proposed zoning map and zoning ordinance changes. So Chris, as you see, there were three questions under that were proposed by Commissioner Blackwelder. I don't know if you would like to address those now, or would you prefer to address them later?
Yeah, I think I'd like to address them now as a kind of a nice segue into the other topics that flow from that land use and zoning. And I put together some slides on the PowerPoint, but I'm just trying to find how to go about sharing my screen with you. I wonder if Holly's still on. She could send me it.
Sure, Chris. You should be able to just the green bar at the bottom that says share.
There it is. I got it. Thank you. Okay. 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 I think you can probably see the screen now. It says Planning Commission meeting.
Yes.
Good. Okay. So we have 3 questions, and they really relate to kind of an ongoing discussion related to residential plan communities, the various subdivisions, and the treatment of the open space, and concern that the comprehensive plan would not be protective of that open space. So I want to take this really slowly and get through it point by point. So the first question is, will changing the zoning in the comprehensive plan from residential plan community to resource conservation provide more or less protection from development on associated plats? In a nutshell, the comprehensive plan does not change the zoning. So there's no, adopting the plan does not do anything with respect to the zoning ordinance or the zoning map. There are no zoning changes in the draft comprehensive plan. The plan is a recommendation, it's a guide, it's not the law, and nothing changes with respect to the zoning when a comprehensive plan is adopted. The draft plan does include a map that shows a recommended land use for every property in Chesapeake Beach. And that map is called the proposed land use map. So every parcel is recommended to have a certain use, and that signals what the town's policy is for land use and development and conservation. But the plan does not change the zoning ordinance. So will changing the zoning in the comp plan from residential plan, community resource, the premise is wrong. The comprehensive plan doesn't change anything, okay? So let's go back to the plan though. The plan is the proposed land use plan 2040. This is the illustration that's in the comprehensive plan. And it's not a zoning map. This is a guide. This is a recommended vision of the town for the year 2040. The plan recommends that open spaces and forested lands that are part of the platted subdivisions be protected and maintained in natural and open space uses. So the plan clearly says that those open areas that surround and in and out of the various subdivisions be protected and maintained. So here's, for instance, Richfield Station. And here, this green area all around it is land that has been platted as open space within the subdivision plat. And the plan is saying our recommendation, at least for the next 20 years, is that that area should remain in open space, green space, protected. And there's no plan whatsoever to suggest that anything that protects that land would be removed. This is open space, and the plan says it ought to remain open space. And it does this by coloring these properties green, which is the color for the recommended category we call resource conservation. And the town has had a resource conservation land use category since 2002. It's been a recommended plan category since 2002, and was reaffirmed in 2010 when that plan was adopted. And your present plan, this draft, again, reaffirms that. In fact, not only that, it expands the amount of area that the town is explicitly recommending be preserved as open space. So this is the land use plan. This map is the town's official zoning map. And residential plan community, RPC, is a zoning district on this map. And there's a whole section of the zoning ordinance that talks about residential plan community as a zoning district. And it's right now, it's this area that's has a light yellow shade. It encompasses Richfield Station and Bayview Hills. That's the only RPZ zoned land in the town. Everything that's shown here in light yellow. There is no RPC in Chesapeake Village or the Highlands or anywhere else. It's just related to Bayview Hills and Richfield Station. The zoning map is the law. That's in contrast to the land use plan, which, as we said, is a recommendation. So this is where the rubber hits the road. We have a good land use plan map. We've had one for 20 some years now, and it's going to change over time. But this ultimately is the most important document for directing land use decisions. It's the zoning ordinance. It's the law. The zoning map gets changed once a plan is adopted. And, we're talking about coordinating it so the comprehensive plan and the zoning map run essentially on the same track. And they certainly will, or they can, but the zoning is always a couple steps behind the comprehensive plan. And as a matter of fact, when the town council goes to make its decisions about these two documents, they would act on the zoning map only after they've adopted the comprehensive plan. The RPC covers most of Richfield Station and Bayview Hills. There's a small section of Richfield Station that's zoned residential medium density, this bright orange color. But by and large, everything else is RPC. Even some town-owned land is zoned RPC along the outside edge of Bayview Hills, by the way. And there's one privately held development parcel that's not been developed. It's right where I'm circling right now. That's also RPC. It's an odd zoning category for that parcel because I don't think there's actually a residential plan community master plan for that parcel of land. There was a master plan adopted for Richfield Station and Bayview Hills, and over time, these projects built according to the master plan. But this is just a kind of a blank parcel that has the zoning. So in the future, if this zoning map doesn't change, a developer could come in with a proposal to develop this parcel with a mix of housing types, just like you could on any RPC parcel. That's how things stand now. There is also a zoning category called resource conservation. We use it both in the land use planning and in our zoning districting. So this zoning district is shown as green, and you see that the zoning district covers the panhandle that we've often talked about, the natural resource area. And it covers the big wetland up here by North Beach, and it covers the wetlands that surround Fishing Creek. That's the extent of the resource conservation as it exists now. Those are lands that are zoned resource conservation. So back to the question. The fact that the draft plan recommends that existing open spaces and forest lands within the platted subdivisions be used as resource conservation strengthens the protections that already exist. I want to reinforce that. The fact that we are recommending resource conservation could only help protect these parcels, as if they were even needed. And candidly, I don't know that the added protection is needed, but it's certainly a benefit because it clearly shows what the Planning Commission's vision is and the town's vision is long-term with respect to these open spaces. Because the plan makes it the town's official policy that these areas be preserved and protected, or in other words, that these areas not be developed. So by showing these areas as green rather than as yellow, which they're currently shown as, we are saying no matter what happens, it's the town's policy that this area always be green and open space. Now, as we know from previous discussions, a document I sent to you, this 200-acre parcel, for instance, is protected by a bird wildlife sanctuary conservation easement. It can't be developed, and the town is the party that's responsible for enforcing it. This area is perpetually preserved as open space. Now, the comprehensive plan is saying that's a good thing, and we're going to support that idea by showing it on our plan as green, indicating that's a resource we want to protect. So back to this. If the town were to change the zoning now, the zoning of these open spaces and forest lands from RPC to RC, these lands would have the added protection of a zoning category that discourages development and promotes preservation. So if we go back to the zoning ordinance, and here again, you see this huge 200-acre parcel. Right now it's zoned residential plan community. If the zoning were to change to resource conservation, then that does not in any way hinder the protection of the property. The property is protected, and it's protected first of all by the conservation, the deed of conservation that says it must stay in open space and forest forever. It's also protected because it's part of an open space parcel that's platted. It's contained within the subdivision, and subdivision plats are not amended willy-nilly. It's an extensive process to amend a subdivision plat, which would ultimately come down to a decision made by the Planning Commission. So changing the use or the configuration or the use or reconfiguration of an open space would actually change the plat. It would force the need for a plat amendment. And plat amendments require that all parties to the plat be informed and participate in that decision. In fact, I think even our zoning ordinance requires that plat amendments have the approval of those people who are party to the plat. So it's really a rather difficult thing to change a plat. And the plat is the legal delineation of the lots and the setting forth of all the conditions that restrict or enable development on those lots. What I'm saying is that this particular parcel that is now zoned RPC is protected by a conservation easement that runs with the land. However, if the town were to use this plan and say, well, it's green, why don't we make this big wildlife area just like we made the Panhandle, make that green too, make it zoned green resource conservation, then that's fine. It doesn't in any way eliminate the protections. It actually, in some ways, while it's redundant, there's a great deal of redundancy here, I would say it probably is more protective of that area than keeping it in its current zone. But again, it's the underlying easement that protects the land, that runs with the land. And again, the town is the entity that's responsible for enforcing this protection. Okay. Let's go back. So we'll changing the zoning in the comp plan from residential plan community. Let's just say we're changing the zoning period. Provide more or less protection. It will provide more protection. But in the context of this particular parcel, it's not necessary, but it will provide more protection in the sense that it's another layer of governmental zoning authority, using the police power to protect something. And as you know, the resource conservation zone is rather restrictive in terms of what's allowed. Okay, so the second question is, how will rezoning affect who must be notified and who must approve changes to land use on plats? Well, this rezoning will have no bearing on the plats. Those legal lots will continue to exist as legal lots with the restrictions that exist today. Adding a zoning category that's different than the one that exists today does not lift the protection, does not change the protection. It continues to remain protected by the open space restrictions and the easement restrictions. The open space within these subdivisions is either platted open space or forest protected by covenants or easements. There are no land use changes possible on designated open spaces or lands protected by conservation easements. The zoning of the land does not remove the underlying legal protections that are in place. 3, what would the draft comprehensive plan update allow on rezoned open space, residential and conservation plats in the newly zoned resource conservation zone? The draft plan recommends that open space and conservation areas remain in open space and conservation. So the plan recommends the use, and the use it recommends is open space and conservation. As previously noted, these are areas that are platted already as open space and protected by conservation easements. Designated open space platted within a subdivision can only be open space. Okay. The plan does recommend recreational trails, however, within preserved forests, and this is allowed. The construction of trails under certain circumstances are allowed within these forest protected areas. And in fact, you might recall that conservation easement I sent. It has a paragraph that explicitly says that trails, recreational trails, are a permitted use or activity within the FIDS habitat protection area. And that was a really important thing that the town wanted to insist on. And the Critical Area Commission was accommodating of that at the time that agreement was assembled. Because as you know, we had a vision for a trail extension leaving its current terminus. The comprehensive plan does not recommend rezoning residential lots in these subdivisions. So there's no effect to the residential lots. And I hope I got that last question right, or answered it properly. So commissioners, that's kind of my way of answering those 3 questions. I could take more questions or, provide more details, I hope, if it's necessary. But I really want to give the assurance to you that the plan is in the right place. If the commission wants to protect open space, you're right where you need to be.
Okay, are there any
Okay.
questions of Chris?
I have some questions.
Okay, go.
So practically speaking, how would a planning commissioner approving a site plan that's presented to them know about these easements? Because I did not see any reference. I mean, this forest interior dwelling bird habitat protective covenant. Can you pull that up by chance, Chris?
Yeah, it'll take me a couple of minutes, Laurie, but I can. I have to remember where I stored it.
That would be helpful because there's a section in that I want to.
Okay, just give me a minute. I'm gonna stop sharing, then I'm gonna open up my folders and look through the folders to find it.
Okay, I also have it on my computer, so, well, I might, let me see.
Oh, yeah.
I'll
Okay.
look for.
Okay, I have it.
Okay.
Lori, I have
Thank
it.
you.
Found it. Let me.
Okay. So it might take me a second to get my questions in order in the right form of the knot. But I did do my homework and took the time to try to find this in Calvert County land records. And we used several methods and the person on the other end couldn't find it at all. And I'm not saying it isn't there, I just don't know how to find it.
Well, I found it and provided it to everybody.
No, I understand that that's there. My question is it current? Has it been overridden? How does one know if somebody 5 years down the road with, all this discussion, over several months has kind of gone to the back of everybody's mind, how does one know to even think of this? If it's rezoned RPC and not indicated that it is a forest interior dwelling bird habitat. And then my second question is, it has been replatted. We replatted, we tried to look this up by neighboring properties and we weren't able to because there were replatted properties. And so that is one of the reasons why I was trying to insist on documentation of what came in with the RPCs, because the RPCs require, as you say, people to be notified if land use changes. And if we rezone it resource conservation, I'm just wondering if anybody will even realize that if we get a site plan.
Okay. So first question is, how do people know that this exists? And I will grant you that these documents are not easy to follow. That's why there are title attorneys that are involved in a lot of real estate transactions. This particular document is referenced on the legal plat for Richfield Station subdivision. And for anybody who would ever want to look up a plat in Maryland, there's a resource online called plats.net. And if you have some basic information, you could generally type it in as a query and you'll get close to it and you just have to research a little bit. But on the plat, there's a specific reference to this deed. And so first of all, someone who looked at the plat, which is a step that you always do before developing a property and certainly before any properties submitted for approval. When you look at the plat, you see that the land is restricted, that you can't do anything with it except for conserve trees. Then if you wanted to look more into it, you would follow the deed reference that's listed on the plat, and you could go to the Maryland State Department of Taxation and Assessments and do a search on the deed with the deed number, because it's right there on the plat. Type that in and you'll go, this document will appear.
How does this document get associated with the plat? Because the other thing is this document says it's a 202-acre property. The property that you pull up on Calvert County Interactive Maps is slightly different. It's 199 acres. It has an owner, Richfield Station LL, whoever it is. It says residential. It does not say open space. While it used to say open space before we filed the other plat, it does not say open space. It says residential. So I just don't know how people would know that this is protected if we don't put it in our comp plan.
Well, yeah, so, okay, there's a difference. When you say people, you're not referring to the professionals and the people that work in government and they're advising you, and the engineers that have to certify things, and the attorneys that work on these things. You're referring to the general public. How does the general public know that this area is protected? And so by referencing it like we have in the comprehensive plan, that's great. And we've shown is, I think, well, we've designated it as green, meaning that it's going to be protected. And I think we made reference to it. I mean, if the Planning Commission wanted to go through the effort to have this type of document attached to a comprehensive plan, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world, just makes the document bigger. But there are all kinds of easements, commissioners, on properties throughout the town that restrict their use. It's extensive. But anyway, but when an engineer provides a plan for the Planning Commission to review, or an architect, they have to certify that these things are accurate. And that's why we insist on surveys, and only licensed professional surveyors can submit documents. There's a lot of protections built in to make sure that we just don't, forget that a parcel is protected as open space.
Well, okay. So given that we've talked about this so many times and we're still talking about, why didn't we just do that? Why didn't we just reference this in the comp plan and reference all this stuff to protect that land? Because our resource conservation, as you originally proposed it and said the land use section was done, was going to allow one residential unit per 5 acres. So if we were to rezone this area resource conservation, we would be unprotecting it in my mind. Because right now it needs protection. I mean, it can't be anyhow.
Yeah, let me correct you, Lori. Let me make it very clear. No matter what you zone this property, this 200 acres, you're not changing the protective covenants that run with it. There is nothing that anybody is doing to eliminate the protection of this property in any way. And now the question is, how do we make it more known publicly? Fundamentally and intrinsically, everything you've heard me say is consistent with the idea of protecting these forests and open spaces and the easements that exist, and even expanding the amount of open space. There's no question about that whatsoever. The point you're making, one I agree with, is how do we make it commonly known that this is a great resource that's available as a public amenity, essentially, because it protects this area, and by virtue of that, protects the water quality of the bay and Fishing Creek. And I think we should celebrate that. But up until, this past dialogue we've had the past couple of weeks, it was never clear to me that that's the actual point you were making. Was more about, how do we protect this? Well, we've done everything that a government can do to protect this property. And now the question is, how do we make it known that it's protected? And I think we should. We could call more questions to that. I remember in 2002, when we did the comprehensive plan, we actually, and this might be a great idea, we actually called this a sanctuary. This whole area we kind of elevated in importance as a natural resource park. Even though we knew a lot of it was privately held but that fell by the wayside in the 2010 plan. And it really didn't matter because the vision was implemented by this conservation easement and the other easements that were in the land acquisition by the county and the town. So we achieved it, but now why don't we celebrate it, make it known? And I guess that's the value you're bringing to this discussion. And I'm all for it. But there's also a practical consideration here. If you're asking for us to document every protective easement on every, in the same way that I've done this, it's a rather extensive process. But what we do know is that there is a plat for every subdivision. And what I could suggest is that we include each plat in the appendix of the comprehensive plan. And each plat, as someone leafs through it, they'll say, oh, open space, open space, open space. It's all there and it's all legal. It says what it is. Yeah. So, but there's nothing the plan's doing that in any way steps back from that protection.
Okay, so how do we get that done now that we've put it out for draft?
Oh, well, listen, the plan's going to be revised. We have to approach it with a lot of humility. There's going to be a lot of changes that the public's going to request. Some of them you're going to agree with, some of them you're not going to agree with. And not you, the planning commission members, and I suspect there's going to be a lot of deliberations, difficult deliberations. And this is going to be opened up. But what I would suggest is that, I haven't talked with Larry about how, my role would be at the public hearing, but typically I'm asked to give just a general overview of the plan, just as a way of kicking things off, not to get in any details because the purpose of the hearing is to hear from the public. But I can say at that time, there are a number of things that the Planning Commission discussed that we would like to get on the record right now, because we would consider them as very important changes to make. And they include, and obviously this would be the one that I would just elaborate on. And we would suggest addressing it in the following ways. I think amending putting more of a designation on the land use map to make it more of a kind of a descriptive quality to it that says wildlife sanctuary. Because effectively that's what it is, even though it's a FIDS habitat. No one knows what FIDS is, but we can kind of characterize it in a way that people understand it. Anyway, so we'll bring those things up at the public hearing. I think that's the right approach.
I think that's a good approach. I'd like to make a motion right now, though, to include this document in our minutes. Is no one seconding that?
Oh, I will second that.
Okay, so the motion is to include the forest interior dwelling, bird habitat protective covenant and agreement in the minutes for the September 22nd meeting. Correct?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Brown.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous. Chris, over to you.
Okay.
And so with the residue plat that is behind Chesapeake Village,
Yes,
I know that wasn't RPC, but I feel like that came in with our neighborhood as well. It's on all of our reference plats. And that's actually, that one is showing what it is in our, in everybody's, packets they got from QBHI. And additionally, that plat is on this map that says county zoning and land preservation beyond municipal limits, but it's within our limits. And it's dotted out as land preservation, but it's within our limits. So I know that people in my community have a concern about that plat. So what are your recommendations for that, other than, I guess, we would include it, like you said, in the appendix, which is a great idea.
so what, you said plat, are you referring to actual, a real legal plat, or are you referring to another document that I've shown already?
Oh, I'm sorry, it is a legal plat. It's so, do you see the Bayfront Parks and the parcel that, the Randall Cliffs parcel that we talked about, and you so
Yes.
kindly put that tree, which I appreciate. And then across from that is a rectangular shaped plat. This
Parcel.
area here is causing a lot of confusion in my neighborhood because it's contested. The ownership of it is contested right now.
Oh,
So
yeah, Lori, this parcel is odd in that it wasn't owned by Quality Built Homes, the developer of the subdivision, but it was owned by the same entity that owns this parcel, this other triangle on the other side. But the two,
right.
I may have this incorrectly, but I'm pretty certain I have it correctly, that there was basically participation in between these parcels in the development, so that the open space was consolidated, and so this parcel was helped create density that was then transferred onto smaller lots into the subdivision itself, and then it was set aside as green space. However, it's not very clear to me when I look at the plats that it's not treated in the same way that other lands are treated, like forest conservation protected by easement. And you might remember that page from the comprehensive plan that I provided everybody a couple meetings ago. Let me get to it. Sorry to here. See if I can enlarge it. Whoops. Okay, so forest preservation. You see everything here is forest preservation. But there's that triangle parcel you just talked about. Here's Route 261. You see that that's not protected by a forest conservation easement like the rest of it is. And in my way of thinking, that's where the value of showing on the comprehensive plan that the town's policy is that this be preserved as open space. I think that's the value. And following up with a zoning change to make it resource conservation. Because you said, maybe the protection of this property is in dispute. We don't know. It's not necessarily protected by easement. But we just want to make sure that it remains always as open space, as forest preserve, and that someone doesn't petition for some type of zoning change that would allow this area to be developed, or a text change like, okay, I have residential low density, that's what the property is zoned, I'm going to buy some open space on this side of the highway and dedicate it to preservation, and thereby free up some land here to develop. And I'm purely speculating. I have no idea whatsoever that that is possible or worthwhile doing. But it's something that is resolved by proposing resource conservation and then a zoning category like resource conservation also to protect it. In other words,
that was a residue plat that came in with our whole community. So
right.
I don't, yeah, if you, that was our general request of you, is to protect these areas, and in particular, and especially that 200-acre parcel. And so if you have come up with a way to do that better and to document it for, you know, future planning commissions, and you're going to propose that at our hearing and incorporate it in the plan, then that definitely makes me happy, because I don't want that to go missed.
Right. So here, and just to reinforce this or to review, this is that triangle parcel. It's recommended for resource conservation. We want to treat it the same way we treat the parcel on the other side of the road. Okay. I mean, we want it to be used as nature. But the zoning is yellow, meaning it's low density residential. So here's an incongruity.
Right.
It's incongruous, and it making it green makes it in balance again with our intentions. So let's make it green, propose a zoning amendment that will make this resource conservation and treat it in the same way. Now you're going to say, Lori, but the current zoning for resource conservation allows 1 unit per 5 acres. It only does that in areas that are not that are outside of the critical area. All these areas that are green now could never develop at that density. They're critical area resource conservation areas. They're specifically zoned for resource conservation. And even there, you could still do a house, but you need 20 acres. All that aside, the current planning commission's proposal is to not allow residential in these areas. So by changing the text of the zoning ordinance and the map of the zoning ordinance, and you will have identified this as an area to be protected, and you will have changed the law that to be certain that it is protected.
Okay, and the fact that they were used for calculations to do the other density, like, does that go away if we rezone, or?
No, it's
All these,
like it is what it is. I mean, frankly, I think the fact that it was used as residue in order to beef up the development potential so that you would have more neighbors here, that extinguishes the development rights here, in my view.
Yeah. That's the point, right?
But if you look at the plat, nowhere does it say no further development of this parcel is ever allowed. I can't find a notation that specifically says that. I may have missed it, and I'm not an attorney. I'm not practicing reading these plats at that level of detail, but I suspect that this can never be developed. But laws change, right? And situations change. And ideally, the planning commission will have what it can affect in alignment with its vision. And right now, its vision is this: green space. So the zoning map ought to be green space, zone, resource conservation. And it doesn't change anything that happened prior. Okay.
Chris, do we need to agendize that to make that, to have you come back with some verbiage that would allow us to make that change the text of the zoning ordinance to allow that to be open space or resource conservation? What do we need to do? What's our next step on that one?
You've done all that already in the current draft.
For that particular triangle though, for that particular area? It sounds like that needs a little more protection than what the other ones do, because it sounds like you don't have any language in there about that particular piece of property.
Well, I don't think it needs any additional kind of, I don't think it needs to be treated in the same way as this 200-acre thing. And I think it can be treated in the way that you've already suggested it, in that showing it as the recommended use residential and then adopting a zoning, a map amendment, making it residential. But look, well, let's brainstorm. Maybe you say on this map, this is open space dedicated to the benefit of the residents of Chesapeake Village and the residents of the town generally. It was.
Well, is that an area that we could open up as a park to the town? Could that be part that, would we be park,
Well, I don't know. It's still privately owned, people still have the rights to use their property, even though it's residue within a subdivision. It is owned by a private entity. And the question is, it doesn't mean you can't identify it as a future park site, but there'll be some rationale for doing it.
So it is privately owned by the village, by Chesapeake Village. It's still
No.
privately owned. It's not privately owned by them. Okay.
Oh, this is, it should be by Chesapeake Village, and I'm sure that QBHI paid the owner of that property some money in order to be able to use that property as part of their calculations to make more lots. And I guess what started happening maybe is they were getting taxed. The people that owned it were getting taxed, and they didn't want to pay taxes on land they couldn't use. And then it's a residue plat. So I guess it can't be used as a residue plat, but if we rezone it, it probably can be used, I think, in my mind, because that's, again, above my skill level, and no one will ever know if we've got a site plan on that property proposed to us. We would never know. We would never look. We would never pay any attention to it at all. So I guess my question is, how do we not give away land and get nothing in return?
Lori, I have to push back a little bit. You would know. You don't approve these plats in a vacuum. There's never a time which you don't have advice from me or a town engineer or in effect, the engineers that have to certify this, who put their license at stake every time they submit a plan to you. They are guaranteeing that this accurately reflects the situations on the ground. And we insist, that's why we insist on all the documentation when we go into any type of site plan or plat approval. There are safeguards that are built into the process that have been learned over many years, many decades of zoning and development and platting and real estate transfers. So a lot of people would have to lie and mess up in order to make that.
Chris, you're saying this isn't our first rodeo.
Correct. This is in no way this is the first rodeo. And the town is, as you see, the town has been very effective in obtaining a lot of open space when it was necessary. You might disagree with the amount or its location, but it knows what it's doing when it comes to zoning. And there's also other layers of protections, like the Critical Area Commission. Calvert County has to sign the final plats. It's exhausting.
Okay. What you're saying, you are going to protect your license by protecting those properties by the time this comprehensive plan is complete and our zoning code.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
You guys can track me down in the future and find me if this area, if you carve out a big box store down there off of 261. And I guess what I'm saying is, let's do what we can do as a planning commission, to recommend that the town council protect it. And what you can do is what you've done already in the plan. Now, if you want to make it more obvious to the public that this exists and it's protected, then just like this, let's do that,
Agreed.
Okay. Any other questions about the three questions or my answers about them?
Well, I'm still not sure I understand if that property is owned by Chesapeake Village or not. I mean, is that their property and we're just going to zone it resource conservation, or is it owned by the reserve across the street? I mean, I'm just still confused about that.
Well,
What is the answer to that?
I have the answer to that, but I've said that I don't believe the HOA owns it. I believe it's owned by Overlook LLC or some entity that has that name in it. But we can find out right now, assuming the state's Department of Assessments is accurate, we can find out what the ownership is right now, if you want.
Well, I mean, I
Yeah,
think I would, okay, if you want to do it right now, if you want to agendize it for next month, I just want to make sure we know what's going on with that piece of property, and I want to be a little more specific on that. That's an important piece of property.
I can tell you this, it's not protected by a conservation easement like the other forested areas are. We know that. It is identified on the plat as a residue, and it's currently, at least unless I'm wrong, because I looked this up many months ago, I thought it was owned by the same entity that owns the parcel on the other side of the highway.
I think, Chris, can you look it up? Because I think QBHI somehow owns that now.
Oh, okay, maybe it transferred. Let's see.
I could have been seeing things, I'm not sure.
Okay, turn away if this bothers you, because we're gonna zoom in.
I'm always on this thing.
Okay, here it is, right?
Yep.
The suspense is killing me.
I know, I haven't looked at it in a while.
This is usually not so slow. I usually pops right up.
It's because you're anxious about it.
Yeah. Try it again. Here we are. Yeah, oh, there it is. So if this is still accurate, Lori, it's owned by Overwater LLC. I said Overlook. I was wrong.
Okay.
But it's this gentleman. I've had a chance to meet him over the years, Mr. Stout.
Mhm.
Or T, one of the partners in this outfit. At least I've had conversations with one of them on the phone years ago. This is a parcel of land, particularly the section on the other side, that has been of interest to the state of Maryland for quite a while about protecting it and preserving it. And that seemed to square with the values of the owners themselves at the time. So anyway, there it is, Overwater LLC.
It now says Chesapeake Village as well. See that?
Where?
Under legal description. Residue, C, Chesapeake Village.
I'm sorry, I can't focus on it. Legal, here? Oh, yeah. Well, so
Residue.
that describes what it is. It's a residue, number C, or letter C and D on the plat in Chesapeake Village subdivision.
I think Overwater LLC also owns Brownies Beach, that parcel of land past where the town owns.
Okay, we'll find out. Let me flip to that. But first, before we do that, I wanted to call this out. Laura, you had referred to the use of another parcel that we talked about earlier, and it said it was called residential. This is not a land use or a zoning category. This is a category for tax purposes. This is something that is a very frequent source of confusion that I have to deal with frequently. People see this and they think that it's a zoning category. It's not at all.
Okay.
But in this present case, the property actually is zoned low density residential, but it just happens to be a coincidence here.
So, I'm sorry, Chris, you're giving me a good education here. Can we go to that 200-acre parcel then?
Okay, well, first, let's not leave this because Kathleen had a question about a parcel.
Sorry, Kath.
Kathleen?
Yes, I believe
this?
that Overwater owns by Brownies Beach, that past Brownies Beach, south of Brownies Beach, there's a parcel of land that is not owned by the town or the state, and I thought it was identified as Overwater LLC being the private entity that owned it.
Yeah, so on the screen right now, I have that parcel identified, and you're right about that. There it is, Overwater LLC.
Okay.
Okay.
Mhm.
Life is beautiful.
You're a psychic,
Thank you.
Kathleen.
Pardon me?
I said you're a psychic.
So I'm here now. What should we do with this?
Do the view assessment. And then, so with the legal description, how would we make that legal description reflect the fact that it's a forest interior bird or dwelling bird habitat protected by covenant?
I suppose we could write a letter to the State Department of Assessments and Taxation. But it's not our, this is not our resource to manipulate. This is their source of data. We know what it is. The owners know what it is. SDAT may not know. But so I just don't know, Lori, that it's even
Okay.
necessary for us to let them know. That's their job. They have reasons for, their reasons are about classifying things for tax purposes.
Right, so should they get taxed the full amount as residential for a bird habitat?
No, if you look at the value assessment, the value as of
Mhm.
January 1st, look at that, $100. No one's paying taxes on this of any, significant.
Gotcha.
What's that, like a 23 cents tax, a year? Something like that, whatever the tax rate is. So no, there's no tax implications.
All right, well, I appreciate the master class. Thank you.
Okay, good. Cindy, do you have any other questions about?
No, I just want to make sure that we have figured a way to change that designation over to resource conservation, so that it's the town council is aware that we want to make that change on that little triangle down there by
Right.
that Overwater LLC owns. I'm really concerned about that property. But I assume, Chris, that we do not need to agendize it further and to make it, specifically an amendment in our zoning laws. So that's just going to be part of what goes into the plan, correct?
Correct. That's
Okay.
right. I really don't think it's
Okay.
it needs another moment of discussion.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So back to the items that, there's a set of text amendments and necessarily a set of map amendments. You've had the text amendments for quite a while, and the ones that I provided you are exactly the ones that the comprehensive plan says we should do. It's in the implementation section. And I know that at least one of the commissioners submitted proposed changes to the land use table, and that's one of many of the text changes. No matter how we do this, it's going to take a lot of time. And there's no way of getting through it in one sitting. But what I might do is focus on the land use map or the zoning map first, because we're going to be talking about the purpose statements of each of these zoning districts. So maybe we should look about where these districts would be. And now you know them because we've already said, what we're splitting RV into RV1 and RV2. We're creating 4 separate commercial zones rather than a commercial and maritime zone. And we're dealing with these resource conservation. I kind of would like to just to continue with the discussion of mapping because that's kind of where we are right now. And maybe as we talk about these various zones, we could flip back to what I wrote as a purpose statement. And if you like the way it's worded, we can just check it and not have to go back to it again. Is that okay, Mr. Chairman? Focus on the map first.
Oh, he's on mute. No, he's not on mute.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so let's get back to this is the zoning map that exists today. At the end of this comprehensive planning process, once the plan is adopted, a new zoning map will exist. We don't know how it will ultimately look, but it's pretty clear what the Planning Commission's recommendations are. And that's what I'm going to discuss tonight. I've kind of drawn what your recommendations are. So this is the current zoning map. And this is the map that I made as a tool for kind of converting this map into something that is actually a little more useful for our purposes and for mapping purposes. And at the end of the day, the final official map might look more like this, which is a more traditional way of mapping zoning districts than the colors. And there are a lot of reasons why we do that. But what I wanted to say right now is this map on the right with the green lines and the gray is the exact same thing as the one on the left. It's just using letters to indicate where the districts are rather than the separate colors. And I'm going to use the map on the right as the basis for discussing changes because it'll be much easier to communicate them. Second, this to the left is the land use map. Why am I showing it? I'm showing it because the zoning map ought to be consistent with the land use map. The two should clearly be consistent. And if they're not consistent, there ought to be some language in the plan that says why they're not consistent right now, and there should be a pathway to make them consistent. For instance, you might say, our vision is to create another commercial zoning district, but we're not going to show it on the map now. We're only going to allow that rezoning when certain conditions happen. Okay, that would be an example where there's an inconsistency in the maps, but it's explained. So the plan is consistent and it all works well together. So let's look at the zoning map on the right. Oops, sorry.
Well, Chris, the zoning map on the right, is that going to appear in the comprehensive plan?
No, sir.
Because the colors are hard to follow. It's easier to follow the lettering than the colors.
Right. Yeah. No, and first of all, this map, and I'll explain why I did that on this map. I used colors and letters, but yeah, this map won't be in the plan, but it would be recommended separately to the mayor and council as a separate document. And because it is a separate document. But you would recommend this along with your various text amendments. So I would imagine a kind of a book of changes that would, so they have everything right in front of them So let's talk a little bit about this proposed set of zoning changes. And I want to zero in and kind of get a little more detailed. First, why are there different colors on this map? Well, there are really two colors I want to call out. One is green and one is red. You see these little red squares and symbols? The red is newly zoned commercial. The red is areas that are not commercial today, but would be commercial in order to make the zoning map consistent with the land use plan. Okay. So those, and the green are resource conservation zones, not the ones that we talked about within the subdivisions, because I wanted to have that discussion with you first. But these are resource conservation areas that the plan specifically calls out. Well, these are zones that the plan recommends. For instance, the plan recommends that this area along Fishing Creek at the end of Harbor Road be zoned resource conservation because it's at high risk of increased flooding due to sea level rise. This is one property that was specifically called out as a proposed rezoning, as was this parcel. In fact, the entirety of Richfield Station. So the parcel here, which is just right now, there's some trailers, boat storage parked there. The resource conservation would allow that to continue, but it wouldn't allow development like you might see under the current zoning, which is maritime. So anyway, if you look throughout this map, you'll see there's a variety of areas that are zoned, proposed for resource conservation zoning, and they're just shown as green. We're going to get to them in more detail. I don't want to gloss over any of this. And the red, as I said, are areas that would be added as commercial. So let's go to a little more. Nope, go ahead, Kathleen.
No, it's Lori.
I'm sorry,
Lori.
me. So what is a PC?
Plaza commercial plaza.
Okay, so there's right on the end of Deer Forest Drive, there's like a horseshoe looking parcel. I'm sure you know which one I'm talking about. It's like down under that. It's not highlighted by anything, but it was resource conservation in our old plan, or no, it was maritime in our old plan, and now it's, I saw it somewhere where it was high density.
Let me zoom in on the bigger map, or more zoomed in map. Oops.
Down. Over left. Oh, yeah, that's it. So that used to be part of the maritime, I think, right? And where's the other map? But now on our maps that we've received, like a part of it is just zoned high density.
Oh, you're referring to this where the
No,
no, you're not.
down
Okay.
for the maritime area. Again, across the street from that. Yep. Now down under that, just south of that.
Here.
Just south of that, on the maps that you provided us, it's labeled high density and not maritime. Right. Yeah, right where your cursor is.
Maps up.
It's
So you're
like
talking about the land use map. And let's go there. Okay, you're talking about this right here then. This is the land use map, high density?
Yes, but in 2010 plan, it's part of the maritime area.
Oh, okay, yeah. So it is still zoned maritime. The zoning is
Okay.
maritime, but the recommended use is is high density residential, or, what it is now is a collection of townhouse apartments. And this plan, the land use plan, acknowledges that they exist and signals that it's a town's intent that they stay there, that the people that live there will always have a home there, and the people who own it could continue to maintain it as housing. So,
Yeah, I think so, Chris, I think they can do that anyways, because they would be able to build back in kind, they'd be able to keep their, I don't want to zone that high density. We're trying to get density out of that area. So I would like to stick that back in maritime.
well,
We never talked about that high density and changing the boundaries of the maritime in that area.
okay. So I want to make sure that all the commissioners know that we're talking about, there's a bit of a delay. You see now this zoning detailed zoomed in map. You see these little boxes. Those are the town, each one of those is a townhouse.
You're talking about captain's quarters.
Yes, sir. Captain's quarters. Okay,
But
so
now it's
it's zoned maritime right now.
Right.
The planning commission has proposed that there be no more housing allowed in the maritime zone. Okay,
Right.
so what do you do when there's an existing community in a maritime zone that doesn't allow housing anymore? And so that's the thing I wrestled with. You could do two things. You could use the existing zoning category we have. We have one for high density housing. And you can say, okay, well, that's high density housing because that's consistent with our land use plan. Or you can say, we don't care that it exists as high density now. We're going to ensure that it becomes non-conforming with the new zoning ordinance. In other words, it's maritime, but it's not housing is not allowed. So it becomes non-conforming. And there are from time to time non-conformities in the zoning ordinance. We try to avoid them, but it happens. And usually it could be very adverse to the people that own property that has become non-conforming. And I know this because we frequently get requests for official letters from banks who are willing to finance a rehab or redevelopment of a project or new roof systems or new parking lots. They will not do it if it's a non-conforming use, because that non-conforming uses are designed to be extinguished. Non-conformity means we are working to eliminate this housing from this area. And so if we had said in this land use plan that this housing ought to be green space or ought to be commercial, we should have showed it as commercial on the plan, and then we would have signaled that the plan is to, make something else out of this. But we're clearly showing it as a recommended use of high density. And so the category that I've suggested is consistent with that plan.
Right, but now there's even more room than there was on those apartments to build more density there.
Well, that may appear to be the case, but that would only be possible if there was a complete redevelopment of the site, and everything was reconfigured. But the proposal is to reduce housing to 35 feet, to eliminate multifamily housing, to do these other things. So
I don't know. I just feel like that. I mean, we're working very hard to get density under control, and that high density is going to complicate that effort. So I would prefer the non-conforming use over saying high density. We have a non-conforming use that you were okay with recommending further north when we reduced up there. So to have it outright be high density in an area where we're trying to reduce the density is problematic. And I don't think we discussed changing that. I think it just popped into the plan.
Well, yeah, to avoid, something has to bend, Lori. If it's maritime,
Hopefully that was,
if it's maritime and it's going to be, and there's no housing that's allowed, then the commission might consider saying no housing allowed in the maritime zone except for that which exists today. In other words, if you're using the property as housing, you can continue using it for housing. You could redevelop it for housing. You could continue. What I'm trying to avoid is making this non-conforming because well, listen, that's what I'm trying to avoid. But the reason I'm trying to avoid that is because effectively what it says is that it's the town's plan to eliminate this housing. That's what making it non-conforming does. And if the planning commission is okay with saying we want to eliminate these housing units from town, then go ahead, say it's non-conforming.
okay. We have never proposed eliminating housing. We have always talked about existing housing in the context of what exists can stay and redevelop in kind. We have never talked about eliminating housing as is or any kind of use as is. But we also have never talked about adding a high density area in place of the maritime zone. We've never talked about that. We're trying to reduce density in that area. So I like your verbiage that says existing housing is supported in the maritime, as built existing housing is supported in the maritime zone. If that anything to make those existing houses conform, I'm in support of. What I'm not in support of is zoning in the area for high density, adding to the lot area that's high density, and then now we have the problem of we have high density coming in and we can't do anything about it.
Is there a possibility, Chris, of making that RV2? Or is that too far away from the other RV2? Residential Village 2? Because that would fit into their zoning characteristics.
Yeah, but I think the RV2 density is probably substantially lower than what exists there today. So in other words, if this were to burn down, you couldn't build it back under the RV standards in the same way. You would build it back with fewer units. Or if they were just, the owner wanted to redesign and reconfigure it as new modernized housing, there would be more restrictions under RV2 that would result in fewer units because the RV2 is a lower density unit than maritime. Remember, maritime right now is wide open.
Right, but if we change maritime to maritime commercial and make no housing, I mean, that then takes it all out of the picture entirely.
Right, so you do maritime commercial with housing permitted to the extent that it exists today, or at the time of adoption of the plan or some other benchmark, which means that you could continue to operate this parcel in the manner that exists today, as in this case, an apartment housing. And you could even be more clearly to say that it could continue to stay in this way, but can be no more dense, or no more units can be established, or units can be established in excess of what exists by no more than 20%. You could be creative with it. But I would suggest if we do get creative with any of this language, we reach out to, and I would do this, I reach out to this property owner just to make sure that they're engaged with the discussion. So, because it is a pretty big change to contemplate.
Yeah, let's fix that. We didn't, I mean, that really doesn't follow our intent. So let's agendize that. And then I guess my other question in the same vein is, by removing the RPCs and making the townhouses in the RPCs labeled high density, what does that then open up in terms of now what can they do?
Okay, so there, if you go back to the overall map, there's no change recommended to the RPCs. That's a category that allows a mix of housing. It exists there already. And so it just shows that the recommendation of the town is that that townhouse community remain a townhouse community, or, you know, that cluster of dense units remain there as a cluster of dense units. And candidly, you could eliminate these areas entirely and make the entire thing RPC. But that begins to kind of break down what it is that we know exists already. We know that there's single family lots and then attached lots. And I don't know that it's your recommendation to eliminate, and it's not, you just said, it's not your intention to eliminate these types of pockets.
Well, I know we're saying, but legally speaking, if we do this, can they come back with an apartment instead of a row of townhouses and say, you said high density?
Well, I suppose they could say that. I mean,
Right, so we don't want to do that.
but I mean,
It would have to meet the other requirements like the 35-foot height limit that you're proposing.
yeah, and the density requirements, and not only that,
Oh.
this is not, like, your question is so, it's in the abstract and it's hard to answer. In reality, this whole arrangement is established by the residential plan community plan. I mean, it's already platted and subdivided. It exists. But could someone come in and say a major redevelopment? They'd have to get the RPC plan revised. They have to revise the plat, and they'd have to come in with a new development concept. And that's what they can do under the RPC now. This is giving them no further leeway or guidance than what is allowed now under the RPC. It just signals what exists there today, and that we know that these are likely to be high density areas for the next 20 years.
I'm fine if it's not granting more privileges. I would have to read the RPCs again to understand whether that's true or not, but I don't want them to come back and make apartments there.
Well, we're not proposing a rezoning. We're just showing that, you know, the zoning stays as RPC. But what I can do, Lori, is compare the high density zone with the RPC provisions and with what exists right now there. And maybe that would help explain or characterize the concern or the threat.
Okay, can I go back
Yeah.
to Commissioner Blackwelder's comment about captain's quarters? What do you mean by agendize it?
So Chairman Brown, what I'd like to do is, Chris offered to come up with language that would allow the existing homes to remain as a conforming use as they are built within a zone that is the maritime zone rather than a high density zone. And in doing that, he would reach out to that owner so that that owner was aware of the changes. But our intent was never to allow additional high-density housing in that area. So Chris is going to do
Well,
what he needs to do.
speak for yourself,
reflect-
please. When you say our intent, you're talking about yourself, not the commission. The
Well,
question is, there are a lot of homeowners there. This is not a one owner townhouse complex, correct, Chris? These are individually owned townhouses?
I think this particular project is rented. There might be some separate ownership, but in my experience with them, I think it's a rental property, a rental townhouse community on this particular one.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the general pattern that is there.
So it has a one owner, but it's individuals lease the townhomes.
Right, that's right. Yeah, and I mean, there could be some condominiums or some kind of sale that took place over time, but I'm almost certain, and we can confirm that too by looking at state tax records, but I'm almost certain that this is a income producing property.
So how many units are there?
8?
No. Probably 32, 30,
Oh.
36, on the order of 30 to 40.
so Chairman Brown, I wasn't trying to speak for anybody. It's just that we had never discussed taking away from the Maritime District and then changing part of the Maritime District to say high density. We had always discussed taking the Maritime District and controlling and lowering the density there. So to just bring up a high density area that was once maritime that we had discussed, you know, different ways of reducing the density, that's just kind of contradicting and reversing efforts that we have had a consensus on. So I'm not trying to speak for people. It was
Well,
just, you
I
know.
mean, it exists. The captain's quarters exist with between 30 and 40 units, and we had never discussed it. And now we can't represent that we have changed the character of it to be less than high density just because it wasn't brought up. If you want to bring up something new, then we need to discuss it. But I don't see it as, if we haven't discussed it, that therefore leaves it open to change.
No, that's not true at all. You can't just throw changes in that we were never told of. We're trying to reduce density and we're getting worked against by adding density. Nobody ever discussed that. And this has been what has happened over and over again. So Chris did come up with a way to make sure that the existing units are conforming within the maritime zone, that we never discussed dividing into a high density zone. And I think that is what should be done, because it's,
Lori,
We need
the
to
reason why we haven't discussed it is because we haven't got to the zoning map, and these are the discussions that you have. So, I mean, there's not as if, there's sort of implicit in what you're saying is that somehow we're being underhanded. That's not the case at all. It's just there's different approaches to doing the zoning. I would imagine that you wouldn't want to see any further development than exists today, and you can do that with the high density zone. And that's, you know, one option I provided out there. Based on your pushback on that, I offered another approach to the commissioners, which is make it maritime commercial. But that's the dialogue we're having. No one's trying to push one agenda over the other. I'm just putting, you know, ideas out. And we have to convert that land use plan into a zoning map. And there's going to be a lot of that kind of give and take about how best to do it. And by the way, at the end of the day, these zoning questions are going to be shaped, I think, by the property owners who show up at the public hearing. So we got to give it our best shot now, but know that ultimately there's going to be another layer of context to incorporate.
Yes, and I understand, but there's residents that need to have deference to them as well, and we need to start controlling density. The goal isn't to let every single parcel owner have the maximum profit possible that they can have. The comprehensive planning goal is to facilitate the well-being of the entire community, and we are overbuilding. And it seems like no matter what we do to try to reduce density, it does not come out.
Well, I don't know what to say about that. It seems that way to you, Lori, but it's not the way that I'm sorry, it seems that way to you, but that's a consistent refrain about that. And we're working to make the plan consistent with the Planning Commission's vision, and we'll keep at it. And in terms of zoning, there's different ways of doing it. There's no intention to make these high density areas that I've shown anything more than they are. They're meant to indicate that that's the right zoning category. If you decide that a different approach is necessary, then the approach is more of a zoning text amendment and to avoid the non-conforming situation.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question, please? Oh.
Yeah, Commissioner Greengold.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask then, okay, so we've got the arrow going to Captain's Quarters, and then we've got the other arrow going to where? Off of Gordon Stinnett, it looks like? Is that undeveloped right now, that arrow?
No, yeah,
No.
No, that's going to
That's
the,
townhouses back.
those are the
back in
townhouses.
that
Okay.
area.
I wasn't sure, I don't see anything, that's why I was wondering where that arrow went. Okay, okay, it's
Can you
going
see
to
that?
that location. Yes, I see that location. Okay, so we've got those two high density areas already, and Lori's point is well taken. How can we keep that as it is and not have it, a hurricane comes, blows them down, and then all of a sudden we've got, more density. Now, I think to Larry's point, if we have these other conditions like the 35-foot height limit. Now, the other question I had that Lori brought up a while back was a density map, some kind of a mapping of keeping the density down in this area. Is there any way to do that, Chris?
What
That's a great idea.
do you mean, like a map that shows that this area can only have 20,000 square feet?
Right, it has whatever it has now and no more, but have it in a mapping situation.
But
So
there's
that you keep
land
the
that is,
density.
but so
Sorry?
you're saying that, what about space that's undeveloped now?
Well,
It would
for
have to
exa-
remain
give
as
me-
undeveloped?
Well, I'm talking about residential. I'm talking about the residential development.
Okay, so in that case, the only parcels that at least I'm aware of right now are the two that we just mentioned. There's one more actually, and that's this apartment building that's in the center of the marina. And I know you know it well because you and I were on this site,
Yeah.
and very problematic set of land use conflicts here. Not an ideal place for a residential structure, but it exists. And actually the way that I had proposed it was that situations like this, where there's a clear land use conflict, would become non-conforming. But situations where there's not a land use conflict and a clear, solid, protected, buffered residential community would remain that way. And that's why I wanted to give it a category, a zoning category that would ensure its continuation and longevity. This, though, is potentially really problematic. And its eventual conversion to something more fitting to this marina activity, which is in many ways light industrial, there seems to be a public interest in that. However, if we go with the approach of saying within the maritime commercial zone, existing dwellings can remain, then this would remain. The market would change over time, of course, but it would,
Right.
you would signal that this could continue there on that site. It would be treated in the same way as this one and this one.
Okay. I would like to make a motion to follow that approach in both areas.
Can you describe that approach so that we have something concrete to make a decision on?
I would like to make a motion not to rezone a portion of the maritime area to high density and to allow for existing residential uses to continue as a permitted land use in that district. Some kind of language that says as is or at the current density. And Chris had offered to come up with language for that. And that is his professional expertise. So I think that that is the right approach for us to take.
I will second the motion with conversation.
Can
with
you
discussion.
state the motion, Commissioner Greengold? Because I'm a little confused.
Well, I think what Lori's asking is for language from Chris to basically keep the current housing as it is without labeling it high density. Is that right? Is that what I'm hearing, Lori? Is that you want the current housing designation, but but it's not to remain that if something happens to that property, if something destroys it, you want it to go back to maritime commercial.
No, I want to say that can remain as residential within the maritime commercial because it's already built. And so Chris had suggested that there's a way to do that. And my motion is for Chris to write that language for us so that it functions in that way. And we're making this harder than it needs. I know everybody understands the intent.
So Chris, do you understand what is being asked?
Yes, and I could maybe more succinctly, I think, describe it. And basically, you're saying that within the proposed maritime commercial district, allow the continuation of existing housing units as permitted uses.
Right, and we're
Now,
not changing.
that would presumably apply to all the rest of the maritime district too, right?
It would apply to all the area that we're proposing to be now maritime commercial.
Where we had previously said no residential in maritime district. Now
That's
we're
right.
opening it up, so we're saying if it's there, it can continue.
Right.
So it would have to be a conditional use permit, wouldn't it? Wouldn't they have to fall under a conditional use permit to be an exception to the rest of the zoning?
Well, not necessarily. What you could simply do is in the table of permitted uses, you can say housing developments that exist at the time of adopting the 2021 comprehensive plan, or existing housing developments permitted by right, P. Or you can make it a conditional use, and then you just have to go further into the zoning book and see that the condition is that it existed prior to January 1st, 2022. You know what I mean? Either way, we can do it.
Now,
it doesn't have to
would that permit the existing property owner to get a loan for a roof or to rebuild a burned down townhouse or something like that?
Yeah, in my experience, it's better than making them non-conforming, but it's not as ideal as having the use permitted, by right, because basically you're signaling that the density or the intensity can't be changed. You're signaling that it is as it is, and it will remain that way. So it's a good question to put to a real estate expert, or a real estate finance person.
Yeah, being my wife volunteers for the Red Cross, so when they have a problem at one of those units down there, like one burned down this past spring, she was the first one on the scene to try and help the people out, because they're basically the poorer people in our community living in those units. So I don't want to penalize those people while we try and do some abstract reduction in density.
Absolutely not. And I want everything there to stay as is. But what I don't want to do is label that piece of land high density so that we can add more density to it. And so I know that that was our intent. And Chris has suggested a couple different ways where we could meet that intent. And I don't think that that intent is met by labeling the whole parcel high density. So, and we never discussed changing the boundaries of the maritime zone. So I think that based on the discussion, there is something that can be presented to us that looks like what we originally intended.
So I seconded the motion that Chris come back with language conveying that, which Lori just talked about.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion? Chris, any final thoughts?
The intent could be achieved in multiple ways, and one of the ways it could be achieved is the way I initially recommended. I just want for the record to know that my suggestion of having this as high density residential does not mean I'm suggesting it be redeveloped at a higher density. It's not at all the case. But the recommendation is, the motion is sound and it can be achieved, and we should certainly provide a context and an opportunity for the owners to comment.
Okay, well, the owners would get to comment, not at the public hearing, because it wouldn't be at the public hearing, right? It would be in an ordinance change, and the ordinance, then the map change. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. It would be a separate public hearing that would happen not at the November 9th public hearing.
Right.
Right. But for now, we're going to change it back to maritime, and you're going to come up with language.
Well, we haven't agreed to change it back to maritime. The motion is for Chris to come up with some language to modify it, and then that would be discussed and agreed or not at a future meeting.
Okay.
So I'm sorry,
sorry.
one clarification. So Chris, that would then preclude those properties from being in the maritime area or the maritime commercial, right? That would be solely RHD, like little islands of RHD. Is that what you're saying?
That's what this map, as I prepared,
That's what you're doing.
would show. That's right. They would be separate residential.
Because the M is still there as maritime, so it would not be in the MC. It would be just an island of RHD.
Right, 2 islands.
2 islands of RHD, and it would not be part of the maritime commercial area.
Right, and that's
Right.
how I drafted this map. But again, the other approach, and I like the idea, the way that the chairman phrased this, because it allows us to think about what's best and come back with the best option. And it can be a text amendment within the new residential or new maritime commercial zone, or it can simply be a separate district.
Okay.
Okay,
Well,
so the motion has been made, it's been seconded to do whatever somebody said. I hope Sharon can figure it out. And all in favor of this motion?
let me
Aye.
make the motion.
No, we're just gonna make that motion. Aye.
All right, that's it. Moving on.
It's on to Chris now.
Okay, it's 9 o'clock. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
We've just begun. How can we do that?
All right, we have no motion to adjourn. Keep moving. I don't have to go to work tomorrow.
You, commissioners, you need a majority to vote for something, a quorum to vote, and the quorum is 4. So everybody has to be unanimous to vote for anything that really sticks. But I know we're deliberating and, but I just technically, if you're going to actually take a formal motion, a business-like motion, Mr. Chairman, all four of you have to vote for it.
Okay, well, that's a good point. I like the RHD designation for the captain's quarters myself, so I vote against changing it and leave it the way that Chris has drawn it up. So the motion fails. All right, so Chris, you're up next.
Okay, let's move further north in the town to talk about the zoning changes. Whoops. This, I think this map shows it best. It's a more detailed map. First of all, there is a commercial strip of lots on Maryland 261. By the way, this is First Street. North Beach is just on the north side of it. And C Street here, David. There's commercial zone here. And the proposal consistent with the land use plan would be to make that residential village. Sorry. Okay. Make this my apologies. And this, goodness gracious. Okay. Okay, the commercial becomes residential village 1. This area out here stays residential village, but it becomes residential village 1. This area that's zoned medium density residential becomes residential village 1. So residential village really extends all the way up from the Veterans Park all the way up to North Beach. And that's all residential village 1.
Does that make Horizons by the Bay a non-conforming use?
Yeah, it is already. That change was made years ago. There was such a reaction to that project that the town changed the zoning ordinance. Let me see. The other change that's worth mentioning here, goodness gracious, is this area that's residential high density. How best to do this? Right now, commissioners, residential high density extends all the way from Fishing Creek to roughly 28th Street. Okay, so this is all residential high density, this area. And based on the plan, the recommendation is to make this residential village 1. So it's a down zoning from high density residential. And if I could just give you a closer perspective here. We're talking about.
Well, that's an area that has townhouses in it, doesn't it?
No, not here. This is all single family.
I'm talking about just south of Horizons. There's a row, 3 rows of townhouses.
Here.
No, just south of Horizons.
Oh, I'm sorry. Baycrest.
Yeah. Yeah, right in the center of your picture.
So it sounds like, Chairman Brown, we have the same problem all over the map. So why are we treating captain's quarters differently than all these other areas? Are you suggesting we add density to the area that we all?
No, I'm
made a
just,
consensus of?
I'm just trying to figure out what's being shown, because
This,
you can't add density if it already exists.
Well, you can if the parcel is large enough to do it on, which captain's quarters parcel is.
Well, captain's quarters is, we finished that discussion. Now we're talking about the townhouses.
Right.
Just trying to figure out where they are in the drawing that Chris is presenting.
they are,
Okay, well,
I'm sorry.
how we can density in the areas that we need to reduce it in, and we can't seem to do that.
Okay, Chris, if you'd go ahead, please.
Baycrest is a subdivision that's townhouses. It's located right here. This is the zoning map, and it's currently zoned residential village.
And the proposal is,
To not change it, except that it becomes residential village 1.
okay,
Residential village 1 would not allow a Baycrest, because there's only residential village 2 that would allow any type of multifamily or townhouse attached housing.
Right.
So this zone would make Baycrest non-conforming. Now, Horizons on the Bay is non-conforming in the residential village zone, or anywhere, candidly, for that matter. So now Baycrest would be a non-conforming use. And the planning commission talked a lot about where RV1 should be. And I'm providing you the zoning map that's consistent with the land use plan without any further comment. Except to say that the area down here that's zoned high density now, this area would be zoned RV1. So now RV1 continues all the way up the coast.
So, Chris,
and just considering what currently exists there, there are two developments, Horizons and this Baycrest, that would now be non-conforming. Is that correct?
Yes,
You said one was already non-conforming, correct? The
yes.
the
Baycrest,
taller one is already non-conforming.
yeah, Horizons on the Bay is non-conforming now.
Okay,
It'd still be non-conforming under the proposed.
so it would just be more consistent, making those townhomes also non-conforming and making the rest of it RV1. Okay,
Well,
So,
all
Chris,
of it becomes
what-
RV1, right?
all of it would become RV1. Mhm.
Right.
why wouldn't we just take only the area that is high density and label that high density, like every other people do with their code when comprehensive planning comes along?
What do you mean by every other plan? Are you suggesting that I'm doing something different?
Well, no, they said, okay, we want to have single family houses here, but we have these townhouses, so we're going to take only the townhouses, not the whole parcel, and we're going to label them high density. And those are separate parcels. You can label the parcels that are high density, and keep the rest RV1. That way everybody's conforming and the rest is RV1. We're constantly making this harder than it needs to be.
No, we're not. it is hard stuff. It is, and it is hard stuff. So what I'm suggesting, I mean, what you're telling me now, Lori, is that we have an existing townhouse community and you'd like, in this case, to have a high-density residential zone created. Right
For
there.
just those parts.
Well, for Baycrest and for Horizons, I
Right.
guess.
Well, and also we talked about the captain's quarters, but you had suggested for the high, because we're not proposing adding high density. What we're proposing is that the high density zone represents existing high density housing. So that's how we should write the high density zone when we write our code.
But why wasn't that logic relevant to you when we discussed it down here? That's the same.
That can be relevant for there, as long as we do write it like that.
But we don't need it RHD. We can make it non-conforming just as the other property is non-conforming. And just keep it RV1 all along the coast, which is what we should be doing environmentally. If you turn that into RHD, then they can come by and say, oh, we're just gonna make a massive apartment, complex here, and that'll be the end of that.
That's why we need that language that keeps it as is. And that's what I thought we were discussing for the captain's quarters. And what we would discuss for all our high density areas is how do we allow them, make them conforming, but yet not let them blow up. That's been our intent all along.
Okay. The town's high density zone is not a high density zone that you might find in Bethesda or Annapolis. It's one that's pretty much scaled to what you see now. You'll never see another Horizon in the Bay in the high density zone or anywhere else. So if we did do what you're suggesting and make Baycrest residential high density, you can pretty much be sure that what exists there today is about the same density as you're ever going to get. Not only that, you got some real land availability and wetland issues all through that area too. So there's a practical consideration.
But what about the as-built language?
As exists, you mean? As exists today?
As
As of the date of this?
Yeah.
This,
Language, yeah,
yeah.
all through the
So-
high density areas.
What is your proposal, Chris? I'm sorry, are you trying to leave that high density, or what was your recommendation again?
My recommendation was, since this area, this group of townhouses is already zoned RV, that we keep it RV. When I prepared this, I realized that this is actually RV1, which is a lower intensity type of RV that doesn't allow what exists there today.
Right.
And confronted with that right now, we either keep it RV1 and just say what exists there can continue, or we upzone it to give it a zone that reflects what it actually exists, meaning it's residential high density. So there's two pathways to go. Generally, I'd like to avoid creating non-conforming uses, especially where there's a valuable community investment right there with no impacts adverse to them or to others. It simply makes sense and to continue a use. So I'd like to avoid creating a non-conforming use, and you would if you just called it RV1. But if you called it RV1 and then the text of the RV1 allowed townhouses that exist today to continue,
But
then
why
you're
didn't we
fine.
do that with the marine zone?
Well, because Mr. Chairman had a different approach, saying he would like to see it
Right.
residential density. And I tell you, that's just as valid, because that signals that the long-term intention is to keep it high density residential. So,
Chris, that this is nothing but delivering that density, which we tried to get out to that parcel owner. It's nothing more than that. We're treating two exact same scenarios in different ways because we want to deliver that density to that landowner. And it's ridiculous to pretend otherwise. And we're trying not to over intensify that area. I don't know how often we need to beat our head against the wall trying to develop in a responsible way in this town.
I think it's unfortunate when you call other people's opinions ridiculous. And so if you would confine yourself to the issue, what you support, but don't call other people's opinions ridiculous, please.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was not talking about other people's opinions. I'm talking about the scenario where we're treating two areas that are exactly the same in context, completely separate, so we can deliver density. And that concept is ridiculous.
My intent is not to deliver density. These properties exist already. And I'm trying to create a zoning map that reflects the land use plan that's in draft form. There's no density being delivered. It's not a material concern of mine at all.
So when you have this as an RV1, how do you indicate that the existing level of density is able to stand in perpetuity? What kind of language, where do you put that? Does it go into it as a text amendment? How does that work?
Yeah. Well, yes, it could simply be a line in the description of the zone, or it could be in the land use table that says townhouses or multifamily is a permitted use provided it exists as of the date the zoning ordinance was adopted. This new zoning ordinance was adopted.
I mean, I can go along with that. I like the idea of keeping RV1 all up and down the coast like that. I think that's consistent. But I think we need some kind of language that indicates that will, be allowed in only that one little area. My concern is that the people next door are going to say, well, wait a minute, they have theirs. Why can't we get a non-conforming use here? Why can't we, and all that kind of thing. But I mean, what it is what it is. I mean, they're already there and it's existing. So I think I don't want to see it go to high density, of course. I don't want to see that happen. So I don't think we have any alternatives here. So I say what Chris is recommending is probably something that we have to go forward with, which would be the RV1. And with that language about keeping that property as it is, and only that property.
And the distinction is that this property we're talking about, the RV, well, forget it. I'm not going to complicate things. Forget it.
Thank you.
I'll stop right there. You're right.
You.
Right.
I mean, yes. Okay.
Okay, well, let me just keep on describing some other things. I made a note of this as an item to revisit and come back, so that we have an approach that is defensible and explainable. This big section would be RV2. It's currently RV. It's the middle subdivision, essentially.
Now, do we want to change that to RV2? Why do we want to make it RV2 when it's RV right now? Does it already have the characteristics of RV2 or what? Why, Chris?
Well, that decision was already made, and it was made because I think the Planning Commission wanted some part of the RV to be a little more flexible with respect to a variety of housing types, where RV1 was much more restrictive. RV2 would allow. And there are townhouses in the RV2 that exist today up here and here and up here off of Cox Road. The lots are larger. Accesses to the highway is better along Cox Road than, maybe along the waterfront. Sea level rise is not an issue in any of these areas. I'm just trying to recreate some of the comments it's
Right,
basically
and-
about, there are places where we don't want to see any more, anything other than single family, but there are other places where that can happen. And we wouldn't change things.
And so
I'm just
we do
concerned
have
about,
Oh.
sorry. Go ahead,
Sorry.
Lori.
Go ahead.
I'm
Cindy.
I'm just concerned about over intensifying that area. If you say, like you're saying, buy up 3 or 4 of those and turning them into multi-family usage, we're gonna see a lot of townhomes, mostly townhome situations. And I'm just concerned about the people that are next door to these, multi-families, that they didn't sign up for that. So that's why I'm a little concerned about having that be more intense than it is. But I know we've already discussed that. I don't want to relive it. It's what everybody else is thinking right now. But it's just,
Well, so we do have a public comment that said just that. She had wanted to make that RV1, or she did not want to be associated with areas that we were further intensifying. And when that comment came in, Larry had said that he would keep it for a further discussion. I personally think we should change that area back to RV1. Those people are happy living the way that they're living. As Chris described, for the other RV1 areas, nothing would affect the current townhouses or duplexes or anything in there, and we would preserve those people's community, which is what they have always wanted.
Chris, how
So-
does RV1 differ from the current designation of RV?
The proposal is to eliminate the possibility for a duplex or single-family attached dwellings, or for more of a multifamily type of arrangement. Practically speaking, you need to consolidate a lot of property to do those things, but
So it's
The
more
RV
restrictive. RV1 is more restrictive than RV.
yes.
And
well,
that's
RV2, yeah.
what the one comment we received was she didn't want to continue the way we are. She wanted to be more restrictive, and that's what we've done.
Well, we did it
No,
in the RV1 areas, we made it more restrictive. I think she lives in the RV2. And RV2, we're basically leaving alone. RV2 is basically RV like it exists today,
So
Yeah.
there's no change, essentially.
essentially, other than
What we want
nomenclature.
us to be more,
So Chris,
she did multi-unit houses built in her neighborhood is what she wanted. Do we want to support her or not? I would like to make a motion to change it to RV1.
I will
Okay, do
second
we have a
that.
second?
I will second that.
All right, all in favor?
Are we gonna have discussion or?
Oh, yeah, any
Well-
further discussion?
May I just offer just a perspective here? You're making a suggestion to change the comprehensive plan that's out in public right now. I mean,
Yeah.
this is unseemly. I think the whole discussion ought to be at 30,000 foot level right now if we're going to start second guessing the plan, guys.
Or
We owe it to the
revisiting.
community to wait for them.
Right. That comment was saved as a public comment that we would receive. And we're talking about this zoning map.
All right, so we have a motion, we have a second. Is there any further discussion on the motion?
I just wanted to clarify, Chris, you said RV is the equivalent of RV2, correct? And then RV1 is the more restrictive of the two of those.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, and just so everybody knows, I will oppose this motion because we are replanning the comprehensive plan, and I don't think that's appropriate. So that's where my vote will be.
Okay,
Well,
All right, so all in favor?
aye.
We have one
Aye.
aye, two ayes,
Aye.
three ayes, and one no. The motion fails. For lack of a,
I'd like to
Okay.
adjourn this meeting, but have all of our members.
would you say that again, please?
Just hold on. We don't have 6 members, first of all, right? How many members do we have?
We have 5.
So 3 is a quorum of our,
No, no,
planning.
according to the ordinance, 4 makes a decision.
We have 7 members in the planning commission.
No, we have 4. We have 5. The only one missing is Commissioner Rudke.
I just meant required, there's 7 members of the commission.
Oh, right, correct.
Sorry.
I would like to move for adjournment.
me too.
All right, so we have a
Second.
motion to adjourn. We have a second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that's unanimous. Let's see, is there anything else on the agenda? Is there anyone in the public that wants to make a comment? Hearing none.
Chairman Brown,
Yes, go ahead.
can I just ask, is there any intention to fill Commissioner Larson's vacancy? I know when right after Jonathan left, it was almost immediate that the the position was filled, and I'm not sure how that happens, but
Well, it happens when we have when the mayor receives a volunteer and the mayor makes the appointment and it's confirmed by the town council. So I have nothing to do with that. It's up to the mayor whether he fills the 2 vacant positions on the commission right now.
Okay, yeah, because I know in my capacity, there was a vacancy announcement for the Board of Appeals as well as the Planning and Zoning, and then I made an application, but I haven't seen anything so about that, so I wasn't sure. I didn't realize with Jan that she had applied. I didn't know how that occurred. Okay.
Yeah, as I understand it, and I may not be correct, the mayor did not want to add new members to the commission because every time we add new members, we get new issues and new concerns, and it slows the process down, and we're trying to get the comprehensive plan completed.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask just one more question before we end tonight? I just wanted to ask Chris what the follow-up is on those amendments, Amendment 1, 2, and 3 that we were going over last month. We had the height restriction, the bone density overlay district, those amendments.
Yeah, there's quite a few of them. I feel like I messed up tonight. I was hoping just to give you an overview of how the zoning map could be changed to implement the land use plan, but we kind of got bogged down. Then I thought we'd transition into the text amendments, but you have the text amendments now, and I'll send this map to you. And again, it's just my approach now, but I'll send it to you so that you have time to reflect on it a little bit. But my intention was not that you would actually make decisions on the zoning map tonight. I just don't, this is complicated stuff, but that you would be prepared to hear about it once you hear public comments, and then you'd be ready to go, right after November, you can adopt your zoning map. But I'll be more clear next time. But we don't want to make, I don't think you want to make decisions tonight on the zoning map or.
Okay, we don't want to discuss the text amendments the amendments that we'd already discussed. I'm talking about those. Okay.
Well, I think we want to discuss them and be ready to, because if the public comment comes in and it's embracing the plan and basically confirms your thinking, then you've got your amendments, run with them. So I think I really want you to be familiar with them and you have give and take and deliberate. Same thing on the map too. Everything short of actually approving it would be be great. So that we're ready to go, and you can see the various options that come out once we start talking about different approaches. But we're in no position to approve zoning changes. Really, we're responsible for delivering a zoning map that meets the adopted plan ultimately. We don't get the adopted plan until we hear the public comment and
Right, and address those comments.
address those comments. Yeah.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Good night. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Right.